Thank you, and good morning for having me here. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to have the discussion with everyone around this table. My name is Deb Nardone. I am director of the Sierra Club's Beyond Natural Gas campaign. We work with our 2.2 million members and advocates across the country on many issues around fossil fuels and in many other ways. I am based in central Pennsylvania and have begun to see the impacts of oil and gas extraction, and that's part of what has driven me to do the work with the Sierra Club. So with that, I guess we see that there are some pretty serious environmental issues with gas exploration, with the production, and with its use. There really are no best practices that can fully address the environmental, the public health, and the climate impacts of shale development. Strong regulatory standards can mitigate some of those harmful impacts. However, the Sierra Club is advocating that the nation quickly move beyond natural gas and all fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Best available science shows that even with the best controls and requirements in place, continued reliance on natural gas puts us on a climate trajectory towards disaster. Natural gas is not a climate solution. It is not a transition fuel. It is not a bridge fuel. It truly is a gangplank to a much warmer planet. Although no amount of regulation can make fracking entirely safe, we have to establish strong federal regulations that sets the backstop for which states can operate and for our communities, and help our communities are ensured that we have safer air and water and that our wildlands are protected. Fundamental environmental protections are essential at the federal level so that shale gas development does not continue to pose unacceptable risks or costs to our communities. Establishing minimum federal requirements is particularly important given the exemptions the oil and gas industry enjoys from the basic range of federal environmental protections, such as the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and many more. The threats to the environment from shale gas and oil operations are pretty wide-ranging. The climate impact of fugitive methane and its leakage, combined with emissions at the burn point, means that increased use of natural gas will lead us to unacceptable levels of climate disruption, even in the most optimistic estimates of leakage rates and our ability to control them. We are concerned about the environmental risks of shale development that exist from the cradle to the grave, including the initial seismic investigations to the construction of roads and well pads, the drilling process itself, fracking and other well stimulation methods, to production and processing and waste storage and disposal, pipelines, the trucking, site reclamation, the plugging and abandonment of wells. Along the entire chain of shale development, there are dozens of potential sources of toxic air and water pollution. There are also serious economic consequences to our communities, to our landowners, and important parts of our economy, including tourism, agriculture, hunting and fishing, and other forms of outdoor recreation. I believe Deborah Rogers began to address some of those in her conversation with you on Tuesday. The federal government does have an opportunity to lead and to serve the public good by placing environmental protections, public health, and climate disruption at the forefront of this fracking debate. We have to close the federal exemptions the industry enjoys. Congress must close the industry loopholes by passing legislation such as the FRAC Act, the Breathe Act, and the Fresher Act, all of which have been introduced in the House. We have to finalize a BLM rule that requires rigorous protections, timely information, and a fully transparent process. It includes provisions that would require full public disclosure of chemicals that are used, required baseline testing, a ban on the use of diesel fuel, a prohibition on the use of open pits for wastewater storage, and most important, setback protections that allow communities and special natural places to be off limits to drilling. Furthermore, we have yet to understand the comprehensive environmental and economic impacts of LNG exports, which is essential before we do any authorizations. This committee in the Senate should ensure that the resources are available to our federal agencies to carefully monitor drilling activity and enforce all applicable laws and permit requirements, as well as to conduct the research that's needed to better understand this issue and assess the climate impacts. Over the past couple of days, there have been activists from all over the country here in Washington, D.C., to meet with decision makers and to tell their story. Yesterday, we heard from well over a dozen, 20 or 30 people who have had impacts to their communities, to their families' health. We heard how fracking has jeopardized and turned their once rural communities into industrial zones. These stories really underscore the importance of how important today's conversation is. And I hope that we do have the opportunity to share those stories and enter them into the public record. As carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere surpass 400 parts per million for the first time in human history, we're also seeing methane concentrations, which are a much more potent greenhouse gas emission, skyrocket over 1,800 parts per million, and it continues to grow. Unless we do something quickly and get these emissions under control, we are creating a world unlike any that we've ever seen, a world that the civilization wasn't designed to withstand. We have to transform our energy system. We have to leave the vast bulk of oil and coal and natural gas reserves in the ground rather than putting them into our atmosphere. And this task, in turn, is going to require great political will and sustained investments in clean energy, not in fossil fuels. And we have to start this immediately. Thank you.